right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Vincent Fritzsche.
Fritzsche. Yes.
Vincent Fritzsche, Vincent Wine Company. It's December 18th, 2019. We're at the Nicholson Library on Linfield's campus. Thank you so much, Vincent, for joining us today.
Nice to be here.
We'll start you with the most important question, which is why wine?
Why wine? It's a huge question for me. It's just, it's a thing that brings together, obviously, a beverage and a pleasurable beverage, but farming, science, sort of magic or luck, patience. There is just so much that comes together, and I really came into wine as a young adult. I had several epiphanies through my life of just wine. Obviously, people always, would talk about it, or you'd see in a movie, somebody had some fancy old wine. It seemed like something revered. Mm-hmm. And I remember one time visiting a winery, just being tagging along as a kid, and smelling the cellar, the barrel cellar, and certain things that kind of become indelible. Mm-hmm. And I studied abroad in college, and certainly had some exposure to wine there in Europe. And when I came back to the States and I was of legal age, not only could I buy something, but I found there were books and even magazines and just newspaper columns back then, this being almost 30 years ago. And I found I really wanted to seek out anything about wine, any information about where it's grown, how it's made, obviously how it's enjoyed, how it can age, how it may not age, and for various reasons, various styles of wine, methods of production, etc. I found it fascinating. I love reading about it. I actually, when I think about it, I had more time than money. So I had time to read. I would look for opportunities to taste. But it's not like I had so much money and I could just go out and buy all kinds of great wines and just try them, So in that way, almost the difficulty of gaining experience became part of the pursuit and the interest throughout my 20s of kind of, reading about wine, thinking about wine, meeting other people. And that led to the wine internet, such as it was in the 90s, discussion groups, bulletin board things, forums, like that. That really allowed me to connect outside of my local area. I was in San Francisco at the time. It allowed me to connect with wine lovers around the world, as long as they could communicate in English. And I found people who were wealthy and had big cellars to young 20-somethings like me who didn't have much of anything but an interest, and kind of everyone in between, from wine lovers to industry people, makers, sellers, distributors, you name it. But all the people who had a wine geek passion would come together and discuss it. And then if somebody was coming to town, we should all get together, the locals, and have a dinner or something. And I just found it was kind of ways to connect and learn more. And I just sort of fell into it, or I kept falling, if you will. I kept finding there was more to learn, more to enjoy or discover, and certainly great wines to taste. And I would taste wines that just moved me and made me really think. Be it a inexpensive Provençal rosé to one time I got lucky to go to a really fancy Burgundy tasting, a trade tasting, when I wasn't in the trade, but somebody from the trade's like, "Oh, come with me," and it was great, and it was revelatory, and it was sort of like it wasn't wasted on me. I'll tell you that. And so I just kind of had an interest and just kind of kept going. It's hard to actually pinpoint any single moment, certainly, and it certainly wasn't it's something that seems so deep that it's not like, I just kind of grew out of that. I'm not interested, It's been a passion unlike any other, outside of love.
So how does the passion and interest turn into actually doing it? What point did you actually get into the industry?
Yeah, that's an interesting one for me, because I'm not and I don't know, some people may be like this. You play guitar and I got to build guitars and build one because none are right for me, so I have to build one just for me. Or bicycles, or, I grew up surfing, but I never made surfboards, never made bicycles, never made guitars, never made these things. I might, be interested in something, but it wasn't that I had to do it. And with wine, it was very much like, being interested in it was a lot. But of course I could never do it. It takes magic. It would take land. It would take being a farmer. It would take any number of things I either didn't have or had no hope of having. It was sort of like being, well, if you were 10 feet tall, you could do it. Like, well, that's never going to happen. So it was interesting that my interest in wine was born or came into it never dreaming I would ever make it. And it was really the wine internet. The story for me is, it's over 20 years old now, where I met via the wine internet makers in California, where I was living, again, the San Francisco area. But I also was influenced. I was working for an importer at a retail shop in the Bay Area, and they got us all together, and their whole thing was kind of like a record label. We're going to break a new band, break a new producer, bring them to America. Nobody's heard of them. And they mentioned the guy, and I won't mention his name, but he's become well known. And I was like, oh, so-and-so, Fred, I know that guy. He participates in this discussion group. He was like an ex-nuclear physicist who makes wine and does so very well and very notably, but also spoke, had good command of English, and was a wine geek and would communicate. And they're like, essentially, I could see in their eyes, like, how, wait, you know him? Like, we're the ones who introduced you to him. You can't know this. It was a destabilizing moment, I'll just say that, where the idea of this model of we are going to expose the world to somebody, and somebody was online and a totally approachable and interesting person, and wouldn't necessarily suffer fools, but if you were interested, you could communicate and ask questions or whatever, and give answers, because they might have questions too. And so I just kind of found the internet allowing people of a common interest, no matter what you did, and your normal position. If you walked in a room, you could kind of tell the person who was well off or the older person or whatever. Here we were just all people, and you could kind of sit together without it being cliquish. And it turns out, did you realize that person's the national distributor of so-and-so? Like, I had no idea. We were just talking about our mutual love of Zinfandel or something. And the point of this all is that I was blessed with the invitation to come help with Harvest. And I'd like to tell the story that I was like, oh my God, I've won the lottery, Who knew I could come help? And I've learned that, like, we'll take anybody with a pulse, right? If you want to come help sort fruit, by all means. You want to clean, come on down. But I do half kid. We really will take anyone, but practically. But here I was being invited to come help, and I did, and I found I liked it. And so much to my surprise, I became interested in the making of something I was passionate about, not just the doing of it, the building of it, rather than just the use of it. And so it was quite surprising to me. And bottom line, communication on the internet with strangers.
Amazing.
This is the pre-social media world, but it's how people did it. And even then it felt evolved, and people would talk about the 80s, where you had very just simple, rudimentary bulletin board listserv type things. This was actually fairly robust compared to that, but still you look back and think, did we have the internet then, 20 years ago? I guess we did. Yeah, I did email, okay. Things have changed. Sure. Yeah, so.
Tell me about the first time working in Harvest. What about it appealed to you? Why did you like it?
It was so tangible, and it was so real. I mean, I'd read books about people making wine in Sonoma County, or things that had involved, touched on that or whatever. And here I was helping one person in particular who made wine in another couple's facility with a few other people who rented space. And so none of them owned the facility. One rented it, the other sort of rented space from them. The licensing was all, above board, but it was its own particular structure that I've seen replicated many times and have done myself, but I had no idea you could do that. I thought you had to own a building on a hilltop, and here they were in an industrial part of town in suburban Santa Rosa, and making wine. And so it was like, oh, I didn't really realize you could do this. And they're like, oh yeah, let's go out to this vineyard that I work with. I'm like, oh, I've heard of this vineyard. I thought so-and-so owned it. Deloche Winery makes wine from that vineyard. They're like, oh no, I mean, a few producers do. And we have this acre over here by the road. And I was like, what? Like, oh, I didn't really, yeah. Oh, and it dawned on me, I'd seen makers of Pinot Noir, I had Hirsch Vineyard this and Hirsch Vineyard that. And I just sort of put it all together that, oh, you could have a piece of a vineyard and you didn't even own it, but you would work with it, and the grower, you're really tight with them. It's like, oh yeah, let's go see, Fred the grower or whoever. And we stop by and check the vines, go talk to the grower. They're talking about, the harvest is coming up. And it just hit me like, oh, I'd read about these things. It's just one of these obvious things that strikes you, and all of a sudden, this is it. These are people doing it day to day. And they also didn't look like me literally, but they felt like me. They didn't have a lot of money, they had a lot of passion, they had a lot of knowledge, and were willing to work hard. But they didn't, it seemed very, not approachable, very reasonable, fairly approachable. Like, God, that's something you could do, and without it just being a, hey, me too, I'm just going to jump in and do this. I remember thinking to myself, God, I really built this up to be like something that would be, exactly, it'd be a chateau in Bordeaux, and blah, 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 from a lineage, and really that's one, not obviously the American way, and two, it's actually even in the old world, very common for people to, even by their standards, work untraditionally or seemingly untraditionally, on estate kind of focus, where you rent vines or otherwise have arrangements to get very good particular fruit with which to make your wines. And that's essentially how I do this here. So, and so I found it connected my passion of wine with the making of it. We talked about it a lot while we were doing any of the work. The work seemed varied from vineyard, even if you don't do your own farming, you might do some green harvesting or other shoot positioning or other things and kind of tend your area, like sort of taking care of your rental house or something in the yard. Like, you may not rebuild it, but you might tend it, and it's probably a bad example. But the point being, here are people who didn't own something really and kind of had the farming done for them, were still very involved. And I just thought I would do that, and then we're going to go by the winery and top some barrels and clean some fermenters and get ready for the coming harvest. And I just thought, mix the stuff. I don't really like going to one place every day, all day. I mean, people would say, who does? But I think some people really do. And I've certainly worked jobs that have been like that. But it just, on so many levels, it appealed to me, this work and this kind of culture. And it was something that I just kind of filed away. At the time, this being literally 20 years ago, my wife and I had decided to move to Oregon. In part for wine, but it was hard to imagine. But at that point, I was like, I think I want to make wine, and I think I want to make it in Oregon. But I didn't, we didn't move north with that declaration. Our move north was to be here, not to go somewhere and get a job, go somewhere in a few years, move somewhere else, and then what are you doing? And we just really wanted to get away from the Bay Area. It was just so already high stress and high money and just sort of crazy. And we both loved Oregon and had spent a bit of time here and thought, this is where we actually want to be and raise a family. And we'll see about that wine thing. And so the next year we moved north, and in many ways I thought, in the year 2000, I thought, God, did I just have a break in wine? Did I meet some people who, without riding anyone's coattails, but legitimately, like, I could have gone back for harvest the next year, or otherwise just kind of kept helping, or otherwise apprenticing is really the right word. And that seemed very unexpected, seemingly rare, well, maybe not as rare as I thought, but still something that, gosh, am I going to just walk away from that? But really, life was bigger than that one thing at the moment. I already had a daughter. We really, had a bigger plan together, and it made all the sense in the world. And if something were to happen with wine, it would sort of lightning would strike twice. It would have to strike again. And so we came here in 2000, and I kind of filed away what I'd learned, that inspiration, and thought, we'll get back to that, or sort of. Yeah.
What did you know about Oregon's wine industry at the time when you moved here?
A bit. Through my wine geekdom, I'd had the early wines of Domaine Drouin, Yves Chimwood. I remember the year after we moved here, the importer that also sold at retail in California that I'd worked for, they introduced Yves Chimwood through their newsletter. I was like, I've heard of them. But it was very funny. I think their model has changed. But the idea was, I'd had exposure to a number of the wines, not all terrific, but there was a particular shop in San Francisco that, while they didn't focus in Oregon, certainly had an Oregon carried a number of Oregon wines as they carried wines from around the world. And they had a little opportunity to go down there and they'd have bottles open on a bar and you could kind of taste a little bit and pay basically a fractional cost of the wine. And so I'd go in there after work on Friday and pour myself little 1 ounce samples of things and you know, for $2 or something, you could get some of the bottle of the $20 Domaine Drouin, you know, 92 Pinot Noir. And then they had the Lorraine, some special new bottling. And I remember it not being any other price, and I thought, or any different price, and I remember thinking that was interesting. I think that was just at the very beginning and went good for them. But I remember those wines were terrific. Those 92s really stuck with me. Being young wines, I'd love to try them again. But I tried some other ones, and I also live right across the street from, I probably should have spent more time with this one, from the Ashbury Market in San Francisco, which at the time had a terrific wine shop, and as part of this kind of old-timey grocery in an old Victorian and, you know, in the middle of San Francisco. And their wine director, Debbie Zacharias, I always wonder if I pronounce her last name right. She's, I think, a partner now in the Ferry Plaza wine merchant there, and is very much, I mean, very involved, very high-level person in wine. And but she was sort of the wine buyer at this place, at the Ashbury Market, and she loved Oregon wine, or had kind of a passion, and maybe it'd probably come up here, maybe she, who knows, but she stocked the Oregon wine press from McMinnville, the old one that was, you know, before Hillary Berg and company took it over, and so I would read the monthly Oregon Wine Press because she would always have it. And things like that, though, really mattered. And they would have interviews, even just kind of hokey, funky things. And but things like that, actually, point of fact, you know, the person who would make those deliveries or somehow get the thing, they're like, why are we sending Coles to Newcastle, Oregon wine in California? But I read it, and I was really influenced by it. And I guess so I was sort of primed to think about Oregon wine, and specifically Pinot Noir at the time, being so, you know, focused on that at the time, it seemed, the Willamette Valley. But also where I worked in 1999, or I didn't work harvest, I volunteered for a number of days and got paid in wine, but I basically, over the course of a season, got to do a lot. It was really a great experience. The producer, the home producer, made some Oregon wine in California. And so I also remember tasting wines in barrel from their, you know, they were making Archery Summit Vineyard Pinot Noir in the late 90s, which was like, how do you even know about their, you know, I didn't know. That's how I was introduced to that vineyard, for example. But I just was kind of primed in many ways through my own discovery, through, honestly, the Oregon Wine Press and Debbie Zacharias, and then it just sort of kept building. And while my wife and I thought to come to Oregon for separate reasons, really, we just wanted to be in the Willamette Valley. Again, it was in the back of my mind, like, if I were to do work in wine, that's, to me, it just seemed like, it still seems this way, the most exciting place in North America for wine. And there's a lot of exciting places for wine. But I just feel like there's something special here, and I felt like I tasted it and knew it in the 90s before I lived here. And I only feel it strong, you know, more strongly, certainly no less. So yeah, it was an interesting kind of thread of how I learned about Oregon wine. And when I came here, I was very ready and interested in kind of jumping in. And frankly, through the wine internet, I already knew of a number of people who said, hey, once you get here, let us know, we'll get together, or show you around, take you out to a winery, whatever, just kind of be a friend, basically, a kind of a wine welcome wagon. These people not being on the wagon, but I kid. The idea of just sharing this passion, and some of the people who I knew through this, you know, virtually knew, were makers here, who connected me to grapes ultimately as a home winemaker, and then eventually, when I even worked harvest for 1 year, another, I still buy. Two of them, actually, I work with their vineyards. People I knew back then, one who didn't even have a vineyard, you know, until 15 years ago, but 20 years ago, it was just if you will, quote unquote, a wine geek like I was at the time. And so it's really interesting to see how connections that got me into winemaking also helped me certainly take root, if you will, here in Oregon and in Oregon wine. So But I didn't jump in right away to making, sort of fully, and mostly that was for family reasons. It just was not the best time with little kids, and a desire to not, recognizing that wasn't going to last forever. And so I might wait a few years and see if we couldn't do that. And now it's all, not all in the rearview mirror, but any waiting or any sort of, kind of putting off, at the time might have seemed like a big deal, but now you look back and it's, it was the right, smart thing to do. And it gave me time to just sort of also build a little more organically, let my ultimate interest develop and what I really wanted to do, why I wanted to make wine. You could just say, well, why not? But for me, I really wanted to answer it a little more deeply, and it gave me time to do that.
So tell me about that first step then. After you take some time, you meet some people, you kind of learn about Oregon wine.
Yeah.
What's your first step into the industry here?
The first step was to really, it wasn't so much to the industry, but it was making wine at home. A person I had worked or sort of mentored me in California in that 1999 harvest had been a home winemaker who had, quote unquote, gone pro. And really taught me at the basic level, like, just because you make good cookies, you can't just go to market with them. You have to make it in a kitchen that's regulated and licensed, et cetera. And wine is pretty much the same. You can't just make home wine and take it to the store. But what this guy did was, both for his own enjoyment, and he didn't know I probably didn't necessarily know where this was going when it started. I guess I didn't know where I was going when it started, really. But I figure I'm going to try and make really good commercial quality wine at home. And I'm going to try and do it again, and even again, and get it out to people, friends, hey, taste this, family members, hey, try this. And it not be, like, hey, my Uncle Fred's, rotgut made in the bathtub, but actually like, oh my God, this is homemade? Well, yeah, I work with such and such vineyard. They're like, how do you get that fruit? Like, well, I'm pretty serious about this. I've got to know the grower, and I make it easy on them, etc. I sort of apprenticed with a guy who had made wine seriously at home and essentially gone pro. And during that time also worked in wineries, got more experience. And I sort of emulated that. And so even with little babies in 01, 02, 03, I made wine at home. It really not very good wine. The one advice I couldn't quite listen to was was make a commercial amount. I mean, I like to joke, like, you can't make a tiny birthday cake, like it's all outside. You need enough cake, for the outside, the inside, the whole thing. You need enough proportion for a thing to be the thing. And the toughest thing at home winemaking, besides junky fruit, is even if you have great fruit, you try to make 5 gallons of something, you just have one little carboy or jug. It's hard not to have it oxidize. It's hard to get a fermentation that really, is like really gonna, make the wine with a depth. You had to make a commercial amount. And so those first few years, I wasn't quite sure and thought, well, I'll just dabble with 5 and 10 gallons of this and that. And I did okay, but it took through a few things. I met people through my wine interests and through more wine internet stuff, and just friends of friends, and you meet people around here. Oh, I'm in wine. Okay, come help with bottling. I remember helping a few people with bottling. God bless all the bottlers, because it's my least favorite thing, but it's very important. And so I've done some time myself, and I encourage, if anyone wants to come help with bottling, you too can help. It's much needed. So I would do what I could do, but to be honest, I was like, all right, I'm going to try and make wine. I'm going to try and get production help. But I had a day job. We had little kids. I was kind of carrying the benefits. I couldn't just quit a day job and go work in a winery. I thought, well, I could do Saturdays in a tasting room. I could do something. And I remember interviewing for tasting room appointment things. One place turned me down because I seemed too knowledgeable. And I think they meant I was just they're like, I understand it now. But at the time I was like, what are you talking about? I was just an unaware guy, I think. But I also probably wasn't going to stay very long, and they knew that. And so whatever the case was, basically they could tell. But I remember feeling like, I can't get a tasting room job. Then the place I help with bottling said, hey, you can work in our tasting room, come for an interview though. And I show up and they're like, you were supposed to be here yesterday. at 11, not today. So I got the day right today. I walked out of there like, are you kidding me? How do I get a job in a wine? Like, this is insane. I really never felt so incapable. But the idea was that I thought, okay, here was a way I could get experience, make connections, share my love of wine, and learn, but not quit my day job. And also maybe like, hey, you could come help with harvest or something. And well, I'd have to do it in a pretty flexible way and keep my day job. And oh yeah, no, nights and weekends kind of thing or whatever. And so that never happened. I could never get the tasting room job. Probably just as well. It probably would be my best place, but it was really I tried. So I was just scrapping for any experience I could get, besides making wine in the garage at home that really wasn't very good. And one day I was actually at my day job related thing, and I just kind of had this like proverbial come to Jesus moment where you're like, I gotta work harvest, like really work, like back on track, like 99, but more, but not lose my day job. But you know what, at the time I worked for Portland State, and the one thing you got was more paid time off than I could use. I didn't make a lot of money, so we couldn't go on fancy vacations and take the 2 kids. But so I could flex and take time to, basically work several harvest days and work weekends. And there were many days when I worked for 5 for a winery, 6 for another winery, and 7 and 8 for other wineries still, where I might go to the day job and they'd say, hey, be here at 2, the fruit's going to start showing up, and we'll work 2 to like 10 or something, and have a little dinner break during, and I'd be like, great, and I'd get out of there at 10 o'clock and just like, that was awesome, I want to come back. Or I want more, and I get up, go to the day job, and then maybe that next day do the same thing, or they're like, oh no fruit's coming in, but come the next day. In fact, could you be here all day? Like, great, yeah, I have flexibility, I got that day off, just taking some vacation time. And to some degree I would have, you use it or lose it. So here was a great, I could really try and get serious about this and see if I don't, people are like, well, Vincent, what are you doing? I'm trying to shake the habit, kind of. I apparently like this, but I have a feeling if I keep doing it, maybe I'll be like, oh yeah, I get tired of washing barrels, I get tired of cleaning fermenters, I get tired of sorting fruit, setting up the line, tearing down the line, cleaning the press, and it's not so much that I never got tired of it, but honestly, I guess I never got tired of it. I would be happy to do any of that stuff right now. If that's what we were doing, like, all right, we're done, let's go do that. I'd be like, oh, cool. Not just I know how to do it, but we're gonna make wine. This is great. I kind of still have it. But at some base level, I was just like, let's try and shake this idea. Let's really, let's see if you really want to stay on this ride. And I kept wanting to do it. And the good news is I found, at least in Oregon, though I'm sure it's true in many places, if not everywhere, there's a lot of interest, and there's a lot of excitement about wine, and there's a lot of excitement about people who are legitimately excited about wine. And legitimate, I don't mean I shouldn't use that word, who are deeply excited about wine, meaning not just today, and that was fun, but I'll come back tomorrow, and next week, and the next week, and not just do the work, but also care about what we're doing, so we didn't just process 10 tons of fruit, but we really did a good job and taste the juice, or whatever metric from a wine perspective of we are making wine here. People's real interest in that, and yet willingness to work all night in pursuit of that. Those two things don't always happen. You can find people who work, and we'll take those in the winery any day. Get some wine lovers who don't really that was fun, but I'll never come back because that's not my work. That's fine too. But that, I thought I might, basically work a couple days proverbially and then filter away. I'm still at it. But really, when you're in, you could have a great worker, employee, or something. But if they're not that into wine, there's a limitation because to cook. I don't know. I mean, there's no absolutes. You could have somebody, you could have a composer who's deaf, and you don't have to hear your own music to be great at it or something. But it does seem like if you have that passion and a desire to really work it and do it, and from the vine to the cellar to ultimately selling the wine, that's something special. And I basically felt like I was interested in any aspect of the work and kind of interested to keep coming back, and it's amazing the doors that open. And I don't think that's certainly only here, but certainly here in Oregon in the Willamette Valley, I just find there's such a spirit of our progress and how far we've come, and as new an industry in the modern age as we are. And typically when you find a winery, like there's no Team Vincent, I'm it, and whoever helps at harvest. Or, again, thank you bottling volunteers, or pay, but basically people come out for day work or something. But it's not like some, and there's the staff through the glass. You watch them all making the wine. Like, no, we get after it and do it. And that whole big circle, and we enjoy, and I think appreciate good wine, are interested. So often in wine, you find people who will be like, oh, these French wines, I don't know. And like, what grape is it? I can't even tell. It would be like being in a rock band and never listening to the Beatles or something. Like, I don't know, they're English, It's kind of far. Like, and I don't mean to be, kind of funny about that, but really, I feel like having that full depth of what we're doing in this culture of wine, this world of wine, a history of wine, and we're at a point, before all the events to come, and certainly at the point on top of all the events that have happened, I just found a particular kinship with others in this field here who are really interested in more than just, we're just growing grapes and I don't know, who cares where it goes, As somebody who doesn't own grapes, I'm always asked, am I concerned I won't have access to the fruit that I get? And not yet, certainly, but one of the things is because growers, and I find this true to this day, they're very excited if you aren't just going to blend away their fruit into some macro lot, or just that they'd be excited about the wine that you make from it, and it's not just like, wow, the big winery says they were doing well with our fruit, and they have a bit, but we don't really like their wine. We'd rather work with you. I think you get that a lot, and it's just sort of a certain esprit of wine here that, for whatever reason, it really connects with me, and I feel like I'd like to think something I've brought to it is contributing to that, and that is in part why, so far, been successful. We're still here.
Still here, still making.
Still doing it.
So tell me about some of the places you worked, some of the stops you made, some of the mentors you had.
Yeah.
And at what point you decided it was time to do your own label.
Certainly. Because of the California background that I had, and the person I worked with, who I don't like to get into because I one time in an interview spoke all lovingly. And the way it ended up coming out was somehow it was this co-opting thing. And I was like, ooh, that wasn't good. I need media training. But the idea being that I never like to talk about people unless they be comfortable, or somehow it'd be like, hey, dude, you were just sort of helping us out as a total greenhorn. It's like, that's true, but it meant so much to me. It meant so much to me that I lose track of is their business you're talking about. The point of all that is, the inspiration I had originally was to do my own thing. And so the idea of my apprenticeship here in Oregon was really to build my own thing, and it wasn't so much that I was going to work for others and then decided to do my own thing. But I really thought, no, the way I want to do this, if it were to happen, is I want to make wine. And I think it's something I'm good at. I think it's something that, and I think there's a need for the kind of wines I'm trying to make personally, without that being like crazy or ostentatious or something. But if you didn't feel that, you probably shouldn't do it. But there are others who are kind of after similar things to me, but I feel like there could always be more, and I encourage others as well. And so my apprenticeship was just that, full-time job. So I shouldn't say, apprenticeship can be full-time, but it was a true apprenticeship where I was either working for very low pay or in trade for fruit or whatever it may be, and trying just to gain experience and trying to work with people who made wine on the scale and with a general intention of me, or what I thought I'd be after, and so it would make sense, if you want to be a sushi chef, and have your own little place, you probably should apprentice with somebody who's doing that rather than work at the Red Lobster and run a restaurant, but really maybe learn a lot of wrong lessons. And in that way, so I sought out Russ Rainey at Evesham Wood, Russ and Mary Rainey, who started Evesham Wood in the 80s. Those wines have been and remain an inspiration to me. And for me, it was a funny story because we had an ice storm, and I was stuck in my house, and I thought, well, maybe they are too. So I'll give them a call. And sure enough, Russ, being a nice guy, answered the phone, and I said, you don't know me, but could I come work harvest? And this was, January, and he's like, oh, you're in luck. The people I'd lined up, and here I'm thinking, you already had people lined up? I think he'd been doing it a while, and if he said they're coming from Germany, they might not be able to come. And he has a couple other people, but this one particular slot essentially. And he's like, I'll call you in a month, maybe. And he's such a great guy. He called me in a month, and maybe became yes. And though he didn't put it this way, I essentially did work a day with him in the cellar in the summer, just to probably make sure I'm okay. And I passed. So, but he, they sold their business several years ago, and I love how things have continued on. It's just such a great reference point producer for us. Certainly of Pinot Noir, but hardly only Pinot Noir. I dove in, kind of head first, and that was the 2005 harvest, and worked as much as I could, and established in my work day-to-day life how I could do this. And so by 2006, I had reached out to Brian O'Donnell at Belle Pont Winery, and Brian and Jill O'Donnell have become just, they're such great people, and I don't ever want to overstate friendship. I've just known them for years, and even our daughters went to high school together, and it's just crazy ways the world entwines. And Brian had connected me. He was somebody I knew through the wine internet back in the late 90s, and when I moved here, he connected me to some great sources for who might, vineyards that were very serious commercial vineyards, but who might, especially if you said, oh, hey, Brian told me, and like, oh, we'll sell you. Brian? Okay, we'll sell you some fruit. And as long as you show up, don't make trouble, and pay. And growers, grower, the baseline will keep people happy. If you just show up, don't make fuss, and come with money, and it's like, you're all good.
All still true today.
It is true. It is so true. So I was able to work there in 2006. I kind of job shared there. Their need was bigger than Evesham Wood's need for the harvest sort of slot position, and so it was going to be basically full-time. You would practically live there, and I couldn't do that. But they're like, we have somebody who's going to basically do half-time. You could do the half-time, and so I did that and made that work, and that was that was just a great experience. I learned so much. And then a guy who's like a brother to me, becomes such a dear friend, John Groshaw of Groshaw Cellars, GC Wines. And he, at the time, was making wine on Ribbon Ridge, and then later moved into a facility that he shared in the city, and I worked for him in 07 and 08. And it was all that time where I was making wine on my own at home, in part from fantastic commercial vineyards like Wall Vineyard in the Amhill Carlton, or Meredith Mitchell Vineyard in McMinnville, Zenith Vineyard, which I still work with in the Eola Hills, all as a home winemaker, and small amounts at half-ton here or half-ton there, but a barrel amount for Pinot Noir that was a commercial unit that effectively was a proper size birthday cake that you could really, and to this day, these wines I made from the mid to late 2000s, I would happily pour them in a tasting, and I have actually in several with commercial wines, and they've acquitted themselves pretty well. I feel good about that. And so I was, apprenticing at the wineries, trying to apply what I was learning at home, and mostly learning to let go and make wine in a very simple, hands-off way, which is really, I think, for me, critical to the wine and wine culture I'm most interested in. Where wine is of a place and of a time, maybe of a grape, rather than something that we kind of bring it in and then we're going to rearrange stuff and then put out the best thing we can. I always want to make the best wine I can, but I really want, like with children, if that person's 5'6" and there's brown hair, great. You're 6'2" and you got curly hair, great. I'm not trying to I really want to take the grapes and take the years as they come. And so I really found that through my own apprenticeship, it was interesting. I was just talking with somebody about the 2005 vintage, working with Russ Rainey at Evesham Wood. It rained a whole bunch right at the beginning of that harvest. And I remember how calm he was and how kind of reflective. He's like, well, we'll pick, we see this rain coming, so we're going to pick some today and tomorrow, and then we're going to, looks like we'll have a lot of rain, and then, we'll resume picking once it dries out, give it a couple of days to dry out. And I kind of just learned sort of a kind of one norm approach to inevitable weather, which, is not always a problem. The weather is just what it is. It's a natural phenomenon, and sometimes it will rain, and that's fine. We don't want, the typhoon remnants or something, but I just remember how calm he was and how kind of it wasn't like everything relied on this lot of grapes, and it wasn't like this lot of grapes wasn't unimportant at all, but this is a much bigger thing than this one lot of grapes, and so you really could understand of how to try and get the best out of each lot you bring in, each vineyard you work with, without kind of over stressing about it and or overcompensating, and trying to either do too much or just do the wrong things. So I was apprenticing, applying what I learned, keeping my day job, and that was all successful. But it's not so linear, but over the time, a lot of what I've done, though, is also just reduce technique. If you're going to punch down the fermenters twice a day, maybe once a day, maybe not every day, maybe not most days, little by little, I both learned this from others and just gained from my own experience. Approaches that I have, my sort of approach today, it's not just one thing, but but it is, I do have my kind of general approach, and I really honed it over all those years. So it's fun to think back and to recognize at the time I didn't know where I was all leading, but that was okay too. And kind of as an industry, I wonder where we're going, but I think it's good, at least, could be a lot worse.
So at what point did you make your first commercial?
2009.
2009.
So 2009, I had made wine in 2008 from the Zenith Vineyard, and in 2009 I contracted for my own fruit from Zenith, from one particular block that I've worked with actually ever since, and then another vineyard in the Amity Hills, and I made two wines, all Pinot Noir, one Zenith Vineyard bottling, and then most of the 9-barrel production was the Eola Amity Hills Cuvée. And so a blend of the two vineyards, predominantly the other, which was most of the production. I think that was about 3.5 tons, about 9 barrels and change of wine. Got about 220 cases in bottle. And I was off, I had a day job, but I was selling wine by late 2010 and making more, adding a vineyard on Ribbon Ridge that had just come into production, Armstrong. And then with each year as it grew, production grew. By 2012, I added Chardonnay. I started to make Chardonnay. And I really started out focused on Pinot Noir. And rather than be a producer who kind of has, I make 10 different things. And I've grown to where I work with 5 different grape varieties. But I still feel like they're all of a family. They all kind of have a purpose in what I'm doing. Sometimes wine production can seem like, chicken, sushi, pizza, it's kind of like we got it all. And like I'm always like, what are you really into? I was really into, and I'm really into Pinot Noir and its expression of place, and so I started with Pinot Noir. But I did know that as we went, I would work with other varieties. Wasn't exactly sure what. Gamay, I knew for sure. I waited a little long because it was my reward ultimately for going full time. It typically comes in later. It just extends the harvest. Every harvest with the day job was like playing chicken on the road. Like, and if you made it, you're like, whew, like you didn't want to add more. It's like, don't get fired. And so Gamay just seemed like might get fired. And I thought maybe someday if I can go full time, I could then make Gamay. By that time, it had gained popularity, and so it's harder to source good fruit or to source any fruit. So I wish I'd locked in Gamay a little earlier, but I do make and make it successfully. But yeah, Pinot Noir to start, a couple hundred cases, and really, again, focusing on place. Really, the most interesting wines to me, I label by their place, specific vineyard. The next sort of tier, regional wines by their kind of appellation, and then for me, the base level of my wines represent kind of our regional areas, the Willamette Valley, and so I kind of use that kind of naming system. The finer the wine, the more specific to a place. Almost, I have one wine that kind of bucks that. It's more about later bottling, but yeah, that's really the passion. And even though I've added more grapes in, it's still about wines of place. Yeah.
I can't remember what I was going to ask you. I had this great question. I can't remember where I was going. Oh, yes, that's where I was going. So, tell me about the logistics of starting. Tell me about the name, the label, getting all the things you have to do while still balancing family, full-time job.
Yeah, the good news is I had time to think about these things. The name had come about after several years of searching. Originally I was like, well, maybe it's just going to be called Vincent, but there's got to be something. That just seems like, it's all about me. And so I went around, my grandmother, my mother's mother, and she was married, her husband was Vincent, so my grandfather was Vincent Jones. And my grandmother, Elizabeth Jones, we called her Mio, M-E-O. And so I had this idea around the middle of the 2005, 2006, even labeled some homemade wine, maybe 04, with the label Mio, M-E-O. And of course the Jean Mayo Camusset in Burgundy, and now the Nicholson project, Mayo or Mio is their name. Even then I was like, I don't think that would hold up. If you're like naming a wine, Petrus or something. You're like, yeah. So it was kind of funny. For me, actually, I mentioned it to my parents. I thought my mom would be honored, and she's like, "Why would you name a wine, after her?" So I don't know. That's a good question. It was sort of a novelty, scratch. So. Good grief. With the name, I remember going around in circles and ultimately came back to Vincent. It's my name. And while it's funny that my wines aren't about so much me, they're about what they are, Vincent's the patron saint of winemakers. Vin is in the name. People can say it, spell it, remember it even. The only question was, there are a lot of Vincents. There are other wineries, and if you're a French winemaker, Vincent, if you had a few, I bet there's a Vincent in there. And so it's a common name in the world of wine, and yet there's no specific Vincent wine company. And I did some research and actually wrote letters to a number of different producers of variants of Vincent, and asked them, hey, here's what I'm doing. I didn't soft sell it like I'm just going to be some nobody in the garage making a little wine. I was like, I'm looking to make commercial wine, blah, blah, blah. But I'm going to be Vincent Wine Company, and you are blah, blah, blah Vincent, or Vincent something or other. And if that's a problem, let me know. And if that's a problem, let me know how you've dealt with everyone else who's a Vincent. Because maybe there's a secret handshake. Maybe there's a club. They trade secrets, industry things. So it turned out no, there's not. But while it's hard to trademark a person's name, there's sort of safety in the numbers that there was no specific Vincent Wine Company. And I got a call even from somebody who used to work for Gala, who I was particularly worried about, because I think of them as being, in their own way, rightfully litigious and protective of their name. I mean, but there have been absurd tales of, I had a friend whose Thunder Mountain wines were a threat because of Thunderbird, and it just seemed like I never thought about that. But okay, so here I was afraid that there might be, there's some little issue, but really they were like, again, you can't be our name specifically, but otherwise, like, if you need any help, they were sort of like, give us a holler, welcome to the club, kind of, good on you for getting out there and making some wine. It was like, oh, awesome.
Pretty amazing.
So, yeah, it was amazing. It was really interesting. And so the name ultimately was very simple, but I had to go through a number of machinations to kind of get there. And then label design, I worked with a woman named Angie Reed, who, with her husband, Matt Burson, make Love and Squalor wines. Portland Wine Company in Portland. They're great. The wines are great. And Angie designed my label. And I just think she did a great job. We would meet in a cafe that had wood tables, and I put a bottle on it. And I said, essentially, I want the wine to look good on this kind of shaker-like table. I want it to be sort of timeless and beautiful, elegant, but not, I want it to, like, it might look simple to begin with, and I kind of envision the wines people are like, oh, those are nice wines, but they'll age well, and or, God, they keep being interesting. An hour later, it's even more interesting. And that the kind of the wines that I'm interested in most, I kind of want to design to kind of ideally try and capture that. So it's sort of a maybe understated, quality. And I just feel like she nailed it with just the very simple font, and then kind of the slight movement, and it's a shaft of weed, kind of stylized. So sometimes people think it's a fern, but ultimately it doesn't matter to me what people think it is. It's more that it represents kind of a simple, natural form that is moving or has sort of a dynamic quality about it. And that's essentially how I want, not exactly for somebody to describe my wine, but if they said something about that the wine's more, it just doesn't hit you, it sort of seems to move and roll, or otherwise have its own dynamic kind of energy. Like, or if they just say, oh, it's pretty, it's like something more beautiful than powerful, something more reflective than like blew your head off and you had to like gather yourself. I'm not really looking quite for that. Maybe the emotionally gather yourself. But in any event, it was a great process of working with a very talented designer who, while I think laid it out fairly simply, it took us a while to get to that point, meaning I had a hard time articulating what the hell I really wanted. And she bared with me. And we had lots of coffee and pastries over a few months. And so what was great too is I didn't really want to change. I was hoping that, like, we'll say this works, and I do it for a number of years, it would be great if the label didn't have to change. And so far, so good. I will make, I think, I've since gotten reading glasses, so sometimes I find I want to, like, pinch zoom to, make the font bigger. But you can only do that on your phone, or a screen. But do you ever do that? You want to pinch zoom something in real life? So yeah, I think I do want to increase the font a little bit, but otherwise, I just have been very happy with how it's, I think, reflects what's in the bottle, and yet at the same time, people never say to me, I love your wine because of the packaging. I'm like, I don't really want that. I want you to buy it, I want it to look good, but I don't want that to be, but they'll tell you what they think, so.
So when you started making commercial wine, you were making it in Portland?
I did. So John Groshaw Cellars, my wine was produced as a custom crush winery under his bond in his facility in Portland for the first 3 years, so 09, 10, and 11. And then I moved my production to what was just opening at that time, the Southeast Wine Collective. So it was 4 producers at the start, of course, the home winery division winemaking company, who's still there. The others have gone on to their things. But all of us actually came to the facility having made wine before and had, I was in the year 4 of my commercial production and obviously many years more of making wine. But it was interesting how that facility became kind of like the story that says an incubator. And while we weren't brand new, there was definitely a further gestation, a further kind of maturation. And that happened while I was there. And I made my wine there in 12, 13, and 14. And then after that, went full-time in my business. And it wasn't just because of that, but it all came together so that I found space, but out here in the valley, where I had been instrumental and very vocal about making wine in the city of Portland, being part of the urban winery kind of movement. It's interesting, and that's a great thing. And I did find that in my customer conversations, if you come and taste with me, I wouldn't talk about where I made the wine nearly as much as where the fruit was from, where the wine's from. And so it became somewhat at cross purposes to be talking about where I was making the wine, or specifically that it was in the city. Whereas for others, I think it's critical, especially if you do a lot of on-premise or other kinds of things. There's so much opportunity, and I was very much interested, and still am, but I was at the time interested in making wine in the city and almost literally rolling up the garage door on a cellar, and some people are walking by like, what are you doing? They're like, come on in. And it's a way to connect and break down the kind of the mystery and the tradition of wine. The first question everyone would ask me is, and still do, is where's your vineyard? And so the answer was, we're like a brewery or a restaurant. The ingredients, if you will, come from very nearby, but not right here. And that still usually they were like, wow, that's great. Or if they really believed you, sometimes they say, oh, come on, no, really, where do you make the wine? Like, right here. Like, really? Off division? Like, who knew? But but at times it felt like you were fighting their expectation of something, especially when I was like, well, that's all great. Let's talk about Armstrong Vineyard, or let's talk about Temperance Hill Vineyard, or Bjornson Vineyard, and what these places taste like, or what they may taste like as far as in the hands, in my winemaking. And so ultimately it made sense to have the production be closer to the grapes. There's so much more infrastructure out here, and a lack of just theft of things out of a parking lot or whatever it might be, where out in the country you can, be a little more easy in terms of worrying about, is somebody going to walk off with that metal or something. And so for a number of reasons then, starting in 2015, production has been out here in the Eola Hills proper. And over those years, I've actually now bonded my own space. I mean, I share the space bonded with another winery, but I have my own basically space and do some custom crush winemaking as well now myself, for others. So it's interesting to see how it's grown.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Tell me about as you were kind of right in the middle of the growing urban wine scene as it was becoming a thing. Tell me about what that was like, being in Portland and watching that scene kind of grow.
Terrific, and really cool, because so many different people. It's not that, there are different people making wine, even in the Eola Hills or Ribbon Ridge, but there's really a difference in the Portland, and that was part of both our allure and the opportunity, meaning that it was just as easy to drive fruit from the Willamette Valley to Portland as from the Gorge, from the Columbia Valley, from the Umpqua, from full Southern Oregon, Applegate or Rogue Valleys. And so importantly, you have people making wines. And if it's X, Y, and Z axis, you don't just have different Dundee Hills makers who may also make Ribbon Ridge or this or that. You have Seven Bridges, making Cabernets and Merlots from Walla Walla in the Columbia Valley, and you have the modern founders of urban winemaking in Portland, the hip chicks do wine, making wines from Oregon, so from the Willamette Valley, from Southern Oregon. You have people just doing all kinds of different things, and I thought that richness really added to my perspective as a winemaker, because I really was, and I admittedly am, very exclusively Willamette Valley centric. And while I enjoy and taste and drink the wines of the broader Northwest, I really didn't have a lot of experience making them. And while I wasn't on top of all the urban winemakers, and while they were making the wine, I was definitely in those cellars a lot more than I would have been. And I really got, I got to know Alder Springs Vineyard this, and just different, not even concerns, but opportunities. Oh, here, Vincent, we smell this Mourvedre, like we don't grow Mourvedre in this valley, And so it just kind of opened things up even creatively, and thinking about working with different fruit. At the time, I was Pinot Noir exclusive, and while I've remained Willamette Valley exclusive, I don't make Mourvedre, though still a dream. But essentially, it caused me to branch out and not just be super Pinot centric. And there was just a real camaraderie. There's sort of that. As I said, people will say, so where do you make the wine, or where do you really make the wine? There was almost sort of, if you're in Portland or in any city, I see this in other cities as well. There's sort of don't forget about us, or one time somebody asked me, when are you going to get serious and move down to the valley? Like, this wouldn't be serious. That's something that an urban wine scene anywhere kind of has to overcome. That it is serious and can be just as, if not all the more so, or just as serious as the most serious, or whatever. And what does that even mean? But it's just, but that, I guess it would mean that we're interested in the culture of wine, and not just opening a place and selling a drink. But the idea of Portland winemakers have to fight a little bit more to say, hey, don't forget about us. And on Wine Country weekend, don't forget you live in wine country in town. It may not be the farms and fields, but we're all, the makers are right here. And so come on the urban trail. And I just found it very exciting. We had a reason to come together. There was just so many different inputs, and we had this common kind of desire to share the story of how wine is made in the city, can be made in the city, and for all the wine country, romance or whatnot. A lot of the stuff here is made in the towns of Dundee or McMinnville, or it's not just on a hilltop, which is funny where I find myself now. I'm on the Yola Hills Road. No tasting room for me, but I do taste by appointment at the winery. But I'm truly in this rural, kind of classic setting. But it isn't like the wine suddenly got good where they weren't.
You finally got serious.
And I did. I suddenly got serious. That being said, again, for my own business, I do feel like I'd be swimming against the tide. I don't need to. If I was in Portland, honestly, when I think about it, and I were to make wine in Portland, and look at something even like Division winemaking, which is not, I shouldn't even say they're so Willamette Valley focused, but they've been making Yakima, Chenin Blanc, and they're making Southern Oregon, wine and whatnot. And that's the opportunity in Portland, is to not just be Willamette Valley centric. I guess I chose to remain Willamette Valley. Not that I couldn't be there, but if I were in Portland, I'd be looking at Nebbiolo in the Gorge. And not that you can't do that here in the Valley. And I know people who make fantastic Nebbiolo from the Gorge here in the Valley. It would just seem like that's the opportunity in Portland, is to play with different things than just here. And with all that said, it's been exciting for me now, 5 years in, to be here in Yamhill County and making wine, in the heart of it all. And there's something about that, and something that's been rewarding and interesting for me, to spend more time than ever, obviously, out in the country. I still live in the city. I spend enough time at the winery and enough nights over the harvest season. I could be a part-time resident. That's good though, yeah.
You talked earlier about your winemaking philosophy and the idea of less is more kind of thing.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit more about how you sort of came to that philosophy and some of the techniques you use to bring the most out while doing the least?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to quantify, and it's hard to talk about what one does without seemingly or actually denigrating what others do. I mean, I view winemaking like music or something. We all have our song, we all have our voice, and if you play violin or I play guitar or you play something else, we're not dogmatic, like why don't you play all this other great instruments? Like, well, I'm focused, and I'm choosing the sort of a focus without being overly so. And plenty of musicians do dabble with other things on the side. One time though, I talked with a musician, he's like, I actually had to stop playing guitar because I'm a drummer, and if I dabble with guitar, I'm taken away from the drums. I really need to focus professionally. And it's like, wow, that's pretty big. The opposite of dogma, an intentional focus. But sometimes we'll say, oh, if you're all this one thing, oh, I have only natural fermentation, and you're so dogmatic. And so for me, ultimately, my technique has come from, what inspired me about wine is that it can become, like wine from grapes, is that grapes have everything you need, and that you don't need to do anything to them. That's sort of what makes them the magical fruit, if you will. And the truly magical fruit, and no aspersions on blackberry wine or dandelion wine or any other kinds of things. But I'm really interested in grape wine. I'm really interested in grape wine from grapes, and so it would be like working with wood and just really wanting, like, I want the grain of the wood. I'm not trying to like shellac it into 3 layers of something where you would feel like it's wet all the time. Yeah, isn't that an amazing technique or something? They're like, I really want the grain of the wine to show. I want the place. I want the year to show. And in my understanding of wine, primarily reading and then talking way back in the day, was that, God, so many of the classic wines, and the wines I was most interested in, or when I would taste them, and they weren't always the fruitiest wines, or they'd be more mineral or pepper or all kinds of other aspects that would come out in the wine, or the way they would feel, or maybe some tannin. Think of like a Gigondas or the whatever kind of wine that would be just like, man, this is so unlike anything I taste anywhere else. I'm really interested in that, and I typically found that the less the maker did carefully, the more pure that sort of expression was. And sometimes, oh yeah, they really got into new barrels and they got into this. And like, wow, it kind of tastes like, Australian wine or something. And I love many Australian wines. I have family there and have traveled there, and it's a fantastic place. But I was like, but this doesn't, I feel like I'm interested in, basically if you do less, it just seems like the wines end up being more transparent to their place. And it's a very broad statement. I recognize it's by nature you can poke holes all over it. But man, I just find it to be true, and I find, even as I've made wine now for 20 years and met so many producers and talked with them about what they do, while certainly you will learn, wine is more than just, I just let them ferment and I don't know, they just become this bottled product. Obviously there's more to it than that. And so obviously there are times when people over-romanticize simplicity in wine or technique, and really, you're listening to the producer not tell you about all the toil and the slog and the uncertainty. And while that may be true, there's some middle ground where there truly is, for me, a simple technique. And again, I like analogies. Think of making bread. You might have a couple ingredients, flour and water, maybe salt, maybe yeast, and you need it. But maybe not, but maybe you need it, and rather right. But pretty basic, not the paragraph of ingredients, and not the techniques that are ultimately seemingly about being able to do something the same every time, and or to be able to do a lot of it, throughput essentially, sort of industrial techniques of like, we need to maximize volume or maximize usage of that tank, so we thermo ferment something in 7 days and flip that tank several times. And it's like, those techniques are always about doing something faster, cheaper, not necessarily better. Or the better being, it's better because it's cheaper, it's better because it's faster, it's better because it comes out the same every time. It actually seems to neutralize any of the uniquenesses. So every time we feel the wine's going to be good. And it's like, I'm really interested in what's there and not doing much. And kind of through wine, allowing myself to practice letting go. And so, because you kind of have to, and as a parent, like you raise them to go, and you have to let go, and all along the way, it's little acts of letting go until, and not like you never see them again, but truly when they grow up and hopefully move out, that you let go in a very big way. And I do find the language of winemaking and the language of child rearing overlap a lot, and I think there's reasons for it, and good reasons for it. And so I found that, like with good parenting, you're very careful and in touch with your children, but you are not controlling. You know, you may guide or otherwise and help, but you don't dominate. And I'll tell you, a lot of wines, people will talk that they have a light touch, and then like, well, we got to do that, or we have to do that, or and I learned this through my apprenticeship, and I in all of us. I mean, I second guess decisions I make. I've learned ultimately to not make too many decisions in harvest, because you ultimately are just like, I spent all year saying I wouldn't do that, and then I'm like, okay, it looks like you need to do that, and then you do it, and then you're like, why did I just on the spur of the moment just lunge for something when I thought I was reacting to the vintage conditions? I'm like, what do you know of these vintage conditions and how they'll manifest in the wine? And so much of what I apprenticed was watching people either do less and or learn that we didn't need to do all the things we did. And so it's not that they were horrible things, but we don't have to. And so for me, to really summarize, it's about cleaning, keeping things clean, and then about kind of trying not to break things, like the way you would break cream by over mixing it. Sometimes wine, my own wines occasionally, so it's not like other people's wines, and mine are never this way. My children would never do this, but your children are bad children. But like sometimes wines will taste like broken cream, like a structure all fallen down where all the pieces are still there. It's all there, but the space of the thing is gone, and you've kind of punched it down, or you've batonaged it away, or you've filtered it away, or just whatever. You've over techniqued it, and so much of the technique that we'll use is because we're afraid it won't be good otherwise. Or it will be bad, and will be bad. Negligent winemaker at the winemaking conference, everyone will wag their finger and say, I would never have bottled a wine like this, you know, nobody wants to be that person. And so there's so much fear, there's just so much like, what's gonna go wrong? And if you don't punch it down twice a day, it's gonna turn to vinegar. It won't have tannin, won't have color, or it won't get up to temperature, whatever. It's just like, if you don't do this, bad stuff will happen. Or you have to do this, or bad stuff will happen. And I've learned, keep things clean, and then just don't break the cream. Do not do a lot. And so very little mixing of the reds. And with the whites, no stirring, unless they fall clear and they weren't done, and I want to kind of get them kind of the yeast in suspension. They're sort of kind of like push starting a car or something. Generally not the way you want to start it though. That's only in the worst case scenario, right? And so by and large, just let it be, turn it on, let it go. And so in this case, whites left to ferment and to clarify naturally. And I started bottling some whites longer or later because they would take more than a year to fall clear. And instead of rushing them, or like right now, I haven't sulfured anything that I haven't bottled from 2018, much less 2019. And people always talk about, well, if I haven't sulfured and put it to bed, I won't sleep well. I'm like, I sleep great. And I want the wine saturated with carbon dioxide, slow fermentations. They're like, do less, keep it, don't over mix it, don't break it. And while that sounds actually, I listen to myself, I'm afraid of breaking something. So I guess that we all work out of some sort of fear, but the goal ultimately being that the cream will be better for less mixing. You gotta do enough, but not too much. And so it's essentially a technique of really having trust in the fruit, having trust that each year, it's not like, gosh, if we don't do all this stuff, this wine's going to be terrible. I just haven't found it to be true. And I often don't find it. People say, you got to add this nutrient, you got to do this or that, or you're going to have reduction. It's like, I think everybody in 2019 is facing reduction in their cellars right now, because it just seemed to be a vintage kind of thing. And I haven't added nutrients to wine for 10 years and have never had appreciable lack of finishing ferment. No, they ferment, and clarifying they do. Sometimes I gotta let them go a little, get a little. But I just try not to push them along. I just let them be, and I don't filter them. And I just find that I do use sulfur dioxide, and I don't like it when people get too hung up on what you do or don't do. But I use sulfur. I like to think of it as like refrigerating the raw milk. Like I don't want to take the milk and make something, make something that's not. But I am trying to keep properties or essential kind of quality in the grape or in the wine. I'm not trying to use sulfur as to exaggerate or extract or do something else to denature. But it's also, these are all judgment things of what one does or doesn't do. But I just find ultimately the technique I use, so natural fermentation, no additives besides sulfur, and just trying to pick the fruit, if you will, at an al dente ripeness, kind of a done but not too done. There's so much concern in so many years about long hang time and development of flavors. Sometimes that feels to me like letting food cook too long and kind of wanting to pull it off a little sooner and keep it sort of some integrity about it that it might lose by letting it go too long. But yeah, just a simple touch and allowing the wine to be as it is. And I think actually, in fact, you mentioned a wine to me, a Gamay, that and I remember that wine specifically and not necessarily liking it. And I'll tell you, a lot of times, it's not like I bought wines I don't like. And that one I liked. Sometimes I didn't love it. Sometimes I wasn't sure it was what I thought it was supposed to be. But all those things make you say, stop and let it be what it is. It might change somebody's life. It might be like, hey, you're the one who turned me on to what this grape is. And while that could be interesting, and you'd say, it's like, somebody's version of a song, like their version of the song, that's terrible. You should hear the original great version. And you're like, well, shut up. But no, this is that, and it inspired me. And maybe I will go listen to this better one or whatever. But the idea is to let go of let people love something. Let them find discovery in it. And the differences I'm talking about, and I think honestly most winemakers talk about, aren't these differences of like, I wasn't putting poison in the bottle, and if you like it, hey, it is life, So we're not talking about some it's not a subterfuge, it's not essentially so much about wine I've come to learn about winemaking, and ultimately the grape growing for winemaking is about trust in your process, about things that are largely out of your control. Over a horizon that is very hard to control, because even if you could do something in the farming, the wine's not going to be ready for 2 years, and so who knows what it will be by then or what that will manifest. So it's an act of faith, and it involves a ton of trust. And the trust is like with parenting. It's not like, hey, little Sally can go out all night. Like, no, you have curfew and you got this or that, but within that, you create a very nurturing environment rather than this like lockdown controlling, or you're going to med school and you're going to be this and you're going to not be that. Like, you'd be shocked at how they grow up and the interesting people they become. And I find wine is true that way. I don't think that is, I can hear friends of mine saying, one in particular, it's always saying, oh, wine doesn't make itself. I hate it when people say that. It kind of does. In a clean place, topped up and bottled properly, carefully, it largely does. And the wine cellars around this valley right now, a lot of wine just sort of sitting there, just hanging. It's okay. It's okay. You don't need to fuss with it nearly as much as you think. So it's kind of the approach that I've taken. I started pretty much in that vein, but certainly there were things I had to come off of and concerns of, like, again, not punching down a red fermenter every day or multiple times a day. I think it was Francois Millet at one of the steamboat conferences some years ago from the Comte de Vogüé in Burgundy. He was here for IPNC, and the steamboat folks had invited him to come early for that, and he was classically French. V-neck. I love V-necks. Want to be Frenchman? No, I kid. But I don't know. He has blazer on, whatever. But he was very quiet. He finally gets up there to talk about his wine, and he talked about, my job is to decide when to do the one punch down on Musigny, and you could see people like, what? One a day? And he's like, no, one, the only one, because it doesn't need any more than that. Amarous, you might need 3 or 4. So it's not all the same for, but, and it just blew my mind. Like, what do you mean? Now, they do pump overs and stuff, but clearly they're not mixing things on that, like, just literal morning, noon, and night, or morning and night, two a day kind of recipe. And while every vineyard is in Bussigny, and maybe some vineyards need more physical work to extract what's good there, what's there, hardly every vineyard needs that. Like, maybe we should lighten that. Maybe we should. And this guy's a master. It's not like he's some yahoo who doesn't know what he's doing. So it's just interesting. It was one of those formative moments where, and I've had several of them through reading and conferences or whatnot, where you're like, they only do what? Like, oh, interesting. Okay. So it's just, you learn things that open your eyes to the things that are done differently than the sort of singular way that I apprenticed more in the California, and then just kind of early on, the idea of just a little heavier touch to make sure you're getting it all. I've really I've really backed away from that. So ultimately, my process started very close to what it is now. It certainly evolved, but I haven't gone from, like, my story isn't like I was, conventional winemaking to, like, very natural winemaking. I was influenced by the era of real wine, which is its own problematic term. Natural wine being a problematic term for people. Well, is my wine not natural, or is my wine unreal? But just that idea of simple touch, letting places speak, and allowing for sort of the mysteries and unexpected things to happen. Again, like with jazz musicians, improv, they aren't just goofing around. They've studied 20 years and tuned the thing perfectly, then let go and improv. So it's not just some random experimentation. I found that so much of the great winemakers take if not improv approach per se, but a much less scripted approach, or much more simple approach. And I've ultimately just gained more confidence, I guess. So my story has been a pretty natural or kind of old school way, and only more so as I've kind of learned more and gotten the reasonable confidence, the experienced confidence. But yeah, it's interesting.
So let's talk about the fruit a little bit then. In the vineyards, you talk about you trust the fruit and finding and so where do you find the fruit you trust? What are you looking for in a vineyard?
Well, and that's a great thing. I think something that honestly this may sound convenient, but something that makes our area so special, among others, is that there's a lot of special fruit here. There are a lot of interesting places, a lot of interesting hillsides, a lot of interesting flanks of land that produce grapes that are trustworthy. And so it's not like I have the few vineyards that are, and you have to do these magical things to make it so. I really think that more grapes are more trustworthy probably than a lot of people think. Oh, with such and such we might be hands off, but not with this plant. I'd be like, you'd be surprised. Let some of it just ferment. Don't like put through the cocktails of the amino acids and the go firm and stuff. Like, let it just see what happens, and maybe don't punch it down every day. Don't push it. Just let it be. You'd be amazed. But that being said, the more point of fact to answer the question, it's been just through relationships. I've worked with Zenith Vineyard really from the start, and the Armstrong Vineyard on Ribbon Ridge. The owners there are old friends who planted in '07, and so I've been working with the fruit since they were baby vines. Through people like John Groshaw, I met Mark and Patty Bjornson, who work with their vineyard for Pinot Noir and Gamay. And at the time, even when I met them, they were like, well, we'll have fruit in 2 or 3 years. Like, they're very both lined up and in demand, meaning if you're in that vineyard, great, but if you're not, you might be waiting a while to get some rows. And so happily, I wasn't needing fruit right away, but I thought maybe if I'm still here in a couple of years, I will. And sure enough, started working with their vineyard in 2011. Love that one. It was a fantastic year for them. And so over the years, it's just through people who've tasted the wines, who've gotten to know me, who say, hey, and point of fact, have some fruit to sell. Say, hey, come, maybe come work, work with our vines. And so I've been able to I work with 9 different vineyards for the 5 different grape varieties I work with, some more than one, certainly. And so, and I've learned that There are a couple of vineyards I've worked with over the years that I don't work with anymore. That it's not so much that they're a problem or bad vineyards. I know people who make good wine from them. I've had good wines from these vineyards. I've made what I thought were good wines, but they definitely, if not all grades of a fish or a sashimi grade, if you will. It's a few vineyards I've worked with that haven't really allowed me to basically ferment to the dryness without adding nutrients or whatnot. And so I've definitely weeded out a couple properties, but none that I've ever sort of put on the label. I wouldn't single vineyard bottle something, though it's factually true it's from this vineyard. To me, it's a reward or a reward to the vineyard, but a marker to the consumer that this is worth saying it's from this one place because there's something singular about it. It may be factually true, but I may just call it Willamette Valley because to me it's a wine that represents just the Willamette Valley. And if a vineyard isn't, if I just feel like I can't work with it in the cellar the way I want to, that certainly will be a way I understand I'm not going to work with that vineyard in the future. That being said, that's been far the exception than the rule, and that really it's through relationships, and it's through being able to, and I feel much better than 20 years ago when I first started, of identifying like what am I looking for in a vineyard? What does it look like? What is it farmed? Or how is it planted? How is it farmed? How is you can see it in the canopy, especially later in the summer. You can really get a sense of where the water is in the vineyard and where it's not. I mean, I work with exclusively non-irrigated vines, so we're interested in what is there and not kind of dialing in the water. But you can, I remember looking at a vineyard and thinking, well, I don't know what I'm looking at 20 years ago. Like, is it good or not? And now I have a great idea when I'm looking at something like, oh, I wonder why they're doing that, or oh, I've never noticed this. I wonder if they have such an issue and they, bend the canes for whatever reason in the way they tie things down. There's just different techniques for different issues. So at this point, then it becomes, if I were to add a vineyard or look to, I'd be much more proactive and. Like that's kind of what I did with Evesham Wood. I called them up. I said, "You're probably stuck in your house too, huh?" So I wait for a day when the grower's stuck in their house. I kid, but I'm like, "This is why I want to work with your site. You got the soil, you got the vine age, you got the bull or whatever." I kid. I actually am not looking to acquire or work with more spots. It's more honing in on the ones I work on, and maybe even streamlining a block or two because I have in some vineyards multiple sections that I work with and to some degree, sometimes maybe I could change that up a little bit now. But yeah, it's the way I work with growers, and I always explain this because customers generally don't understand that even when you own a vineyard, you sell fruit, not infrequently, if only just get some money now and pay for the farming and the picking. But also, you got 20 acres and you're going to bring in 50 tons. Like, we're going to make 30 tons and sell the rest. There's it's sort of like a dinner party. By the end, you're just like, anybody take leftovers. It's not like, but that idea of just get them out. Like, I've got plenty of fruit. Like, help me out. So there's just practical realities of vineyards buying and selling, and also the idea of if there's a curse of the estate vineyard, and it's because you're like, gosh, they have volcanic soil over there. I really want to make some wine from that too. So like, hey, let's trade or let's buy from one or whatever. But that idea of wanting a little more diversity in what you produce. So it's interesting how we're able to work with growers on this acre, this half acre. The Pinot Blanc I work with I get all the fruit from the one block of Pinot Blanc at Zenith Vineyard. I've worked with the Ramies there for a decade and more now on Pinot Noir, and started working with them 2 years ago with Pinot Blanc, and just a great site. I finally feel like I have a home for Pinot Blanc, and I feel like something's coming out in the wine where I may actually put the vineyard on the label for the Blanc, or have a special cuvee or something, but like it's getting to that point where there's a purpose to that, and not just it's factually true, but it's meaningful, I think, in the wine. And so the way I work with growers is just very close. It's very relational, and again, I feel lucky that I've been able to connect with people who've wanted to understand what I'm looking for, and not just like, here's the fruit, here's when it's getting picked. It's everything else is how do you want us to be doing this? And obviously I decide when their pick dates are, that we need to find a crew. We need to basically, whether or not you own it, you can only pick if you got people there to pick. You and me, let's do it. So it's, when you talk about having control, it's like, well, control. Well, we're going to pick tomorrow, but now it's going to rain, so we're hoping to pick Saturday. It's just, no matter who you are, you're in it. You're on a boat on the water, and you're just. I feel good about being able to work so close with my growers, such that it's like it's a state fruit. It's like it's like I own it, but I don't have to, which is actually nice. Yeah.
Let's talk about the industry a little bit more broad perspective here. You're 20 years or so in now. So tell me what you've seen in Oregon since you've become a part of the industry. What's changed? What's the same? And what do you see happening next?
It's only gotten more exciting and more. I remember that 05 harvest, Russ Rainey saying, "Gosh, I wouldn't want to be starting a label now or a winery now." And I'm like, past the Gruner Veltliner, I was just going to ask you any advice. I'm thinking by 09 I might have a label now. But I remember thinking that. And he's absolutely right. It's only true. It's only more true, meaning that he was commenting that when he started, it was hard enough to grow grapes, make wine, get out there. And obviously the Oregon industry in the 80s and the later 80s, when he was starting to sell his wine, was not even what it is now or was in 05. So they had to kind of plow the roads before you could drive on them, if you will. And but here it had already come so far that he was saying, gosh, 20 years ago it was a lot easier just to, people say, hey, local wine is half decent, you're in. Now it's like, well, we already got about 10 producers. Well, now people have hundreds. So I look at it and think a couple things. One is there's so much still, I think, growth potential. There's really an interest in Oregon wine and Oregon as a brand. I mean, this is my experience, but I'm a native Californian, proud of my home state, proud of their wines. But I do laugh out loud even when I'm in Montreal and people are like, "Oh, Oregon, the good American wine." I'm not going to disabuse them of that belief. But the idea being that they're like, oh, there's something, it's sort of like a shoe that fits, it's like Oregon, you'd think all that stuff's the same out there on the West Coast, but there's actually something really special in Oregon. And while I was once an editorial assistant in a publishing company, and at 25, friends were like, wow, that's awesome. And I tried to convince them, I'm the editor's assistant. And they were answering phone, I'm practically getting the coffee, this is not glamorous. This is not I'm excited for you kind of thing. But after a while, I just gave up. I'm like, you're right, it's the best job ever. and I find that when people have a belief about something, as long as, again, it's like, I believe this is not poison, and it is poison. Let's try and disabuse them of that. But I would convince that people were really excited for me being an editorial assistant, and I go out in the world selling wine, and they are stoked that I'm from Oregon, because they're like, oh, Oregon, we like Oregon. And I even go to Los Angeles where I grew up, and they're like, he's from Oregon. I'm like, I'm from Santa Monica, but yeah, Oregon. No, but it is great though, because I'm like, taste it. And I literally pour them Oregon, and I love that about it. I love that about the wine and what I'm really trying to do. And I'm glad they like it too. But there's something like over now 55, 54 years, we're really known worldwide. We were known 20 years ago and more, but we are only increasingly so. I think it makes it that much more, if not easy, more level of a playing field, or relatively level, for us to go out there and compete in the world. We don't have to convince people Oregon's okay as much. Generally, people are like Portlandia or have some reason, and they're like, and great, and then pour this, and they're like, and that's really good, like Oregon. And so I feel like we've come a long way, but a lot of it has been to build up this reputation that we are only now taking advantage, not taking advantage of, but like we're growing in our ability to make advantage of it. And so I feel like it remains very exciting. It's been exciting, but remains all the more so. And with the proliferation of labels, which, though every generation says it, and I heard it from Russ, like, I wouldn't want to start now. I certainly wouldn't want to start now. And if so, I also would think it would be very much more difficult for me to focus on Pinot Noir the way I do and have. Because as crowded as the field was in the late 2000s, it's just crazy now. And I feel very lucky and glad that I've been able to establish myself as a maker of fine Oregon Pinot Noir. And I have customers around the country and outside the country as well through distribution, but direct customers around the country and many distributors who share my wines far and wide, and it's remarkable. And who are sort of like, when are your 18 Pinot Noirs coming out? And it's like, wow. That's what I would ask a producer. Like, that must be me, Well, it's been 20 years or 10 as a commercial producer, and I still feel new. But maybe I need to get over that. But I just feel like, as crowded as the market is getting, there's still so much opportunity for what Oregon does, so much potential for us to continue to be the good wine. And Chardonnay especially, oh my gosh. So many people, people love, who doesn't like champagne, or even a lot of sparkling wine out there that isn't champagne, that has some, if not a lot of Chardonnay in it. But they'll be like, oh yeah, I don't like Chardonnay. And then they try Oregon Chard and they're like, oh, but I like that Chardonnay. And now I think about it, I do like some other, it sounds like I like French Chardonnay. I think we have a potential to really be like a trustworthy Chardonnay producer area that is what people are afraid, that delivers wines that aren't what people are afraid Chardonnay are, that are heavy, woody, kind of sweet tart, and just kind of a cocktail or a apricot nectar of a Chardonnay, where they're like almost want reassurance that it's going to be what they want, which is a little more crisp, a little more nervy, but rich like Chardonnay, flavory the way Chardonnay is, and as opposed to Pinot Blanc's more like linear, citrusy kind of purity. So I make both kind of for that reason. Chardonnay has a fatter, kind of richer taste, even when you make it in a leaner way. But if a generation or a decade ago or more, people would look at a pink wine and ask, or just comment like, it's sweet, right? Now, invariably, people will say, it's dry, right? Like, it's switched. And I feel like Chardonnay has so much potential for people to trust that it's going to be something they want, because people trusted that rosé was going to be sweet, and they didn't want that, and it was something that their parents or somebody equally awful would drink. And so the trust has been gained, though. So now they're almost concerned, like, it's dry, right? So that with Chardonnay, I feel like I'll be pointing Pinot Blanc, Chardonnay, Gamay, Pinot Noir. They'll be like, Pinot Blanc, awesome. Who knew Pinot Blanc? I love it, but who knew? There's actually a lot of people out there who love Pinot Blanc, and thank God. And they'll be like, oh no, I'll pass the Chardonnay. And I'm like, really? I make it just like, I make the Blanc just the same. Like, really? Well, here, try that. They're like, oh, well, that's not like most Chardonnay. So I feel like we have this opportunity in Oregon, and part of where it's not just, there's tons of labels, there's tons of growth, but we actually have substantive things to accomplish, which is to help people understand that Chardonnay is wonderful, not just good, and to have trust that Oregon Chardonnay is like, oh, you want one of those? Like, that's the good one. Or that's the good kind. That those producers or any number, or just pick any of them. But I like that one best. So whatever. So I feel like we substantively have that kind of that mission to try to accomplish in the next 10 years. And I think we're really in a good position to do that. And I just feel like, as much as Pinot Noir has been dominant, and I love it, I am excited. I used to tell the story that I love the Willamette Valley in part because we weren't trying to be all things, and we certainly still aren't, but we were very focused, and I like that. We're definitely fraying in that focus, but I think it's exciting. I think there's reason for it. There are many other things that grow well here. They typically are not the things that, they're typically not Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot or Sangiovese. So even that, like try and grow that outside of Italy, that's a challenge. Or not grow it, but like make it. But basically, they're going to typically be the grapes that people are kind of coming into, typically more fringe grapes. And I think that's actually helpful for us to be like, we're not trying to be the third rate, Cabernet Sauvignon producer of the West Coast. It's like, we're not. So we are kings, queens, we are the top of Pinot Noir, and I'd like to say Chardonnay, and hopefully we can cement that more than we have already. But we're also a place for really interesting kind of garden of varieties, as opposed to garden variety, but a mix of types of grapes that are just fun. Like I'd never even heard of that, but you should try it because it's from the Willamette Valley, and they grow all kinds of crazy cool stuff, and so it's kind of the best of both worlds. I'd like to think our growth can really adhere with that, and that the primacy of our leaders of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay can be maintained and actually supported by the fact that we're not just that. And at the same time, we're not trying to replace that, and who knows, a generation or 5 from now, their taste may change, and people want all sparkling wine, and they want it from Trousseau, I don't know. But for right now, I'm interested that the proliferation or fragmentation that's happening or typically in things that any of them are gonna, like, they're an immediate threat to coherence in the market. In fact, they're not novelty. There's some better word to describe their uniqueness as a variety of grapes, from the Trousseau, even Gamay, because I love Gamay, but most people have never heard of it still, and so it's definitely still a fringe thing in the real marketplace. We have a ton of potential with that, but I think we'll only support what we're doing as producers of grapes like Pinot and Chard that are grown and known the world over, and yet we aren't just like an add-on to that tradition. We're actually at the vanguard of it, and it's tremendously exciting. So that's my way of saying I'm going to be planting Mourvedre. No, I'm kidding.
Well, I was just going to ask, what are you looking at as you look ahead for yourself and your company in the next decade?
It's interesting. A little more balance between white and red. I started out 100% red wine. I am probably 65 to 70% red, and I could see that being 50-50 even. And primarily that'd be Chardonnay. For my production, for my brand, I think that can work. If I were to start right now, I have a good friend of mine, Saul Muchnick of Championship Bottle. He's very much inspired by the ones at Friuli. Not like with me in Burgundy or whatnot. It's like karaoke or some cover band, kind of. But it's this inspiration, but a certain family or tradition. But but here, and let's see what that does here. And so there's coherence and yet experimentation. And I think it's fantastic because these Sauvignon Blanc or Tokai Fruilano, a few different grapes that are grown here, and some in very small amounts, so perhaps we'll grow more, literally. For me, I'm more interested in finding a slightly different balance in my production and looking at Pinot Noirs, trying not to ask Pinot Noir to be too much in my production. It was 100% of my production for the first 3 years. That was too much, and I want to make other things, and I do. What's been really interesting to me is finding alternative red wines to Pinot Noir at the low end. And Gamay obviously can be that. It crops higher in the vineyard. It can just even at a you basically can crop it fairly high and make a delicious, colorful, flavory red wine that can be more economically priced and or produced than Pinot Noir, which is sort of like chanterelle mushrooms, and you can't be chopping them up and putting them into some button mushroom omelet, honestly. And so I have a Willamette Valley Pinot Noir that I can't make money on. I'm not saying I can't make money on it. I mean to say that there's not nearly much margin in it to be able. I basically need other things to almost cover for it, and so I can't ask Pinot Noir to basically have that like by the glass, or in keg or whatever. It's got to be different stuff, and so Gamay is part of that. And I've been interested in Gamay, and I'm interested in single vineyard expression of Gamay, but as a table wine, I think it has tremendous potential. That being said, I've been pleasantly surprised to find that red Pinot Gris for me has become another red wine that I make. It's lighter in color, but I make it and market it as red wine. I think of it as red wine. Texturally, it's red wine. It's not just a few days on the skins for color. It's the full fermentation on the skins for tannic expression, to capture everything red about the fruit, literally and taste-wise, but the visual and the taste. And people have been just loving it, not just as a fashionable, chillable red wine, but as an alternative red wine that that kind of is like a Côte du Rhône. It can be peppery and kind of stony and kind of fun and economical to produce, to farm, produce, and ultimately sell for somebody to make can have handmade Willamette Valley wine, and that is just a different expression of, well, literally Pinot, but certainly a different expression of the valley more broadly. And I just think it's been really interesting, and my production of that has been increasing. And so it's sort of, for me, not finding new grape varieties to work with, but to the degree as red wine has definitely been kind of something I'm still working into. And so it's not that I'm experimenting, but it's definitely newer in the mix. And finding the right mix ultimately of red wine, white wine, and really putting more behind my Chardonnay to be part of, to help plow the road and ultimately travel on the road, the Oregon Chardonnay kind of road that says that we make really truly world-class, meaning taste this with the wines of the world of this grape, and they really stand up. And I don't like that word world-class, or people throw things because I'm not really, but when I think about it, actually it does come into play, because when I think about our Chardonnay or Pinot or any of our wines really, what I think so exciting is like we're not only keeping up with the world, like we are really part of the pace group of world wine production, and I'm proud of that, and it's good to be a part of it. And I feel for Chardonnay that we're still on the come up, if you will, and that's exciting too. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
So if someone, I'm sure this has probably happened to you, if someone were to come to you and say they wanted to enter the Oregon wine industry today, what would you tell them? What would your words of wisdom be?
I get people asking me that actually several times a year, and like seriously, a lot of people and I would tell them, God, what do I tell them? I never am too succinct. I tell them a couple of things. One is show up. Just keep showing up. If you want to work production, or you want to just work a harvest, even if you're but if you're waiting tables in a restaurant or whatever, and to have a maker's knowledge, even if you're not going to be making, but you're going to be in wine sales or whatever, to work some time in a cellar, God, so valuable. It will help you not say things to customers that are just factually ridiculous about how wine's made, and we'll all do it. And I remember, you start guessing, like, I think that means this. And so it's just helpful when you have a lot more knowledge and by making. But so how do you do that? Show up. Because I found that the winery work isn't so hard, but at times it's drudgery. Sometimes it's glorified a harvest. I worked 50 straight days, and it's like some masculine or some machismo kind of thing. And harvest isn't about that or any of this work. Ultimately, at times it can be like we're doing that again, or it's cold out and we're going to clean these things. We just dirtied them and emptied them, or filled them, emptied them, cleaned them. We're going to fill them again. We're going to clean them tomorrow. Like, there's certainly more monotonous things in the world, but on the hilltop, we got a harvest. Like, is everyone showing up to work today? I hope so. Come on, be really into it. Because sometimes it's not, you just got to work, right? And so I just, if people are afraid they can't handle it or whatnot, oh my gosh, just show up. And don't let the sort of machismo of winemaking or grape growing and the slog of it be too overwhelming. It may not be work for you, but I actually didn't think I could handle it. Like, this is not my normal thing, a forklift drive and this and that. I've grown into it, But I've also learned, because I think I overbuilt it, and I kind of I didn't have enough people telling me, like, just keep showing up, don't worry, just keep showing up, and you're doing great, or something, or just kind of like, a little reassurance, I guess. So I give people reassurance, they can do it if they're interested, just show up. But I also tell them, no matter what you do, if you're gonna make wine, work in sales, work in a shop, understand the cycle of it. And for me, it's an intellectual curiosity. I'm a contextualist. I make a bad soldier. They'll be like, Fritzche, march up that hill. Well, shouldn't we go around the hill? It's a little flatter, Get there quick. Shut up, go get, Noted, I just, sometimes it's just, I lost my train of thought. What was I just saying? Advice for people, and they're coming.
You're a contextualist.
I'm a contextualist. Oh, thank you. I'm a contextualist. I like tangents too. And so, ultimately, that soldier might have been right to say, hey, there's a better way. But at that point of fact, that's not how things work. You go where they tell you to go. Got it. But in something like wine, which is not that way, if you're going to work as a sommelier, if you're going to work in a wine shop, if you're going to work outside sales for distributorship, if you're going to work in a tasting room, to have a variety of experience in your field, I think, is critically interesting, important for somebody's creative kind of life development. So they're not just like, I just do this robotic job every day. Well, maybe you should look at it a little more holistically, contextually, and then learn about those other things. If for no other reason, it might pass the time, might be a little more fun. But honestly, the more and more as our economy has changed, I think what sets you apart is your ability to not just be like, hey, I'm a cellar rat, but I can't do tasting events, or I can't, or I don't like that, or I don't, deliver anything. It's like, I remember Russ Randy saying, hey, can you deliver some wine for me on your way back to Portland? Can you deliver to Liner & Nicholson wine shop? And I'm like, I get to walk in as your guy, delivering your wine to them? Oh, hell yeah. I'll do that every day of the week. Like, that was exciting, but also I knew that was going to be like, oh, dude, what are you doing? Like, oh, I'm working harvest. Oh, okay. Like, that's not a dumb thing. And just kind of, anyway, I feel like if you want to work in this field, and I would say this of anybody who's in any field, you can't just get hired and have a job. You've got to continually be providing not just value, but just like, usefulness and interestingness. And because 5 years from now, we're not going to be bottling anything. We're going to be putting it all in cans. I don't know, but like, you can't get too dialed into the one thing. You have to be willing to change, and part of that change is understanding what might change, and part of that is understanding various aspects of the business. I once worked somewhere where we had to send out a confirmation that you ordered. We got the order, and the person ultimately was like, my job is to send the confirmation out, not that it get to the person. Because I was like, yeah, the confirmations aren't getting to them. Like, there's something wrong in our. They're like, hey, I sent them out, and I'm like, that's just not good enough. And so I think life, though, is that way. So bottom line, you want into this industry, show up. Don't be too good for anything, meaning wheeling the boxes into Liner & Nicholson was probably a smart thing, even though I was just wheeling boxes like any old delivery person. That's a great job. So don't knock it. But recognize how smart it would be to have a lot of varied experience in whatever field you want to be in. Because that's how you gain expertise, and that's how you become valuable and maintain. And back to the idea of, if for no other reason than you might actually just find it's interesting. You might have more fun. You
might just enjoy it.
So show up and learn stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
That's all the questions that I have for you.
That's
Is
it.
there anything I should have asked that I didn't? Anything we didn't cover that we should have covered?
Nothing that I can think of. I really can't. I'm interested more than ever to hear other interviews and the future ones, and to see them.
Good. There's plenty out there for you, so we'll talk about that.
You guys are great. And I'm also interested to learn more about the project and to see the mysterious archive.
Mysterious Archive, exactly. Well, Thank you so much for
bet.
your time. We'll go show you the Mysterious Archive now.
You bet.
Appreciate it.
Cheers.